I don't like anything about you, Mother. We want to live with our family alone, so get out. I was dumbfounded by these words suddenly hurled at me by my eldest son's wife. The same words that were said when I had to leave my parents' home alone. Now the anger surged in me at the thought of being driven out of this home as well. Well, I'll leave then, I declared and gathered my belongings to move out. That was the last straw. I swear I'll never forgive my oldest son's wife. It was time to put my plan into action. As a result, my daughter-in-law, my name is Sandra Clark, and I am turning 61 this year. Though I'm technically retired, I'm fortunate enough to still be working. Even though I'm still working, it's not like I'm going to the office every day. I drop in occasionally and attend meetings. But nowadays, many meetings are held remotely, and I'm working from home most of the time. My oldest son seems to have the wrong idea that I'm not working anymore. I became a widow in my 40s. Currently, I'm living with my oldest son and his wife. My parents' home is an old house just with a large property. It has its issues, but I really liked the place. That was the reason that made moving out difficult. I never had any financial difficulties in my life. Most of my late husband's insurance payout is still untouched. It's a lifestyle where there is no need to worry about my twilight years. Even though it seems like I'm leading a carefree life, I do have some worries. It's my oldest son's wife. Jessica, my son's wife, has a strong-willed personality and often clashes with me. This isn't something that just started recently. It started when she came to announce, "We're getting married." I can't forget the outfit she wore when she first came to introduce herself. She showed up in a tracksuit that she might have worn in high school. She said she wanted me to see her without any pretense, but I think it's an unthinkable act from a common-sense perspective. It might be too much to call it sophistry, but anyway, she's very argumentative. And on top of that, she's very articulate, which makes things difficult. I wondered why my oldest son chose her as his marriage partner. I found out later that Jessica was the one who approached my son. She may be outrageous, but she is beautiful. I think my naive and somewhat sheltered son was smitten by her. Even after they decided to get married, it was always the same story with her. If you put it kindly, she's not pretentious. If you put it harshly, she seems to lack common sense in her behavior. I really wanted to oppose their marriage, but I told myself that it's the marriage my son wished for and kept my patience. The result is what's happening now. My son didn't want to leave me alone in our family home, so he insisted we live together after the wedding. I had initially thought that Jessica would oppose, but it turned out that Jessica was also in favor of living together. The reason became clear shortly after we started living together. Jessica, however, never did the house chores and left everything to me. Cleaning, laundry, meal preparation, she left everything up to me. What's more, she was a full-time housewife. She quit the company she had been working for at the time of the marriage. Even though I don't have to go to work every day, I work remotely, so I have less free time than her. When I'm facing the computer for my job, Jessica would make comments belittling me, saying, "I'm just playing around." I used to brush it off with a laugh as it was too troublesome to argue every time. But it certainly irked me when it kept happening. "Jessica, you seem to have quite a bit of spare time. Could you help with the cleaning?" I tried asking this to Jessica, who was idly watching a TV drama. Jessica made a deeply disgusted face. She sighed exaggeratedly and said to me, "The reason I don't do housework is for your sake, Mother. Why don't you understand? It's sad that you can't appreciate my thoughtfulness." She brandished her unique theory and blamed me. According to Jessica, if she does the housework, it would deprive me of my only job. She says that if that happens, seniors become sedentary, which is unhealthy, and there's also a concern about dementia due to lack of stimulation. In other words, Jessica apparently lets me do the housework. Her ridiculous logic almost gave me a headache. "I agreed to live together to make sure you don't slack off, Mother." I was speechless and dumbfounded when she said that with a half smile. I really regret starting to live together. I regret every day that I could have avoided seeing things I didn't want to see if I had stayed separate. Doing housework while being watched by Jessica every day is nothing but agony. Reaching my limit, I decided to talk to my eldest son. It wasn't to complain about Jessica. I decided to move to an apartment where I could live alone. The house we're currently living in is old and has many level differences. I had hurt my back last year due to my age and deterioration, and there were many hard points for me. I talked to my son about the difficulty of living in this house, and I moved to an apartment. I felt like I had been driven out by Jessica, but I do not regret leaving. The new apartment is a rental. I thought it might be a bit too big for living alone, but I contracted for a room large enough for my grandchildren to stay over in the future. I had the interior customized to my taste, and my own castle was complete. But my joy was short-lived as Jessica began to come over every day and stay until night. "The new apartment is really nice. Isn't it too big for you, Mother?" Jessica said, lounging on the living room couch. "Come on, Mother, come back to your old home and do the house chores. It's for your health and longevity." Unbelievably, Jessica is telling me to go back to the old house and do the house chores during the day. She's so self-centered and it makes me dizzy. "I've already moved out of the house. You need to step up as the wife. I take care of all the house chores here and my annual checkups are always good. Jessica, there's nothing for you to worry about." Jessica turned her head away, snubbing my words. She intended to pretend she didn't hear them. She always ignored anything inconvenient. That was her usual strategy. Even after that, Jessica came over to my apartment every day. Just the other day, she said, "It's too much hassle to go back," and ended up staying the night. My parents' home and this apartment are about a 15-minute walk apart. It was my eldest son who suggested I live near my parents' home because he was worried. His concern made me a little sad to leave the house. One day, when I had been out on a rare business-related outing, I returned in the evening to a surprise. To my disbelief, Jessica had let herself into my apartment. It seemed she had used the spare key I had given to my son without telling her. Welcome back," she said, lying on the floor in front of the TV, not even bothering to get up. "Jessica, that spare key is meant to be used in emergencies, not for you to let yourself in when I'm not home." I felt uncomfortable knowing that she'd been in my apartment while I was away. I replied, and for the first time I sternly told her so. She seemed taken aback, since she was used to my normally quick-to-forget anger. She shot me an annoyed look, but I stared right back. "You really are a stingy mother-in-law. I can't stand that about you." Jessica began yelling at me. "I can't stand anything about you, even this apartment. We're a family, so you should leave." With that, she tried to usher me out the front door. It seemed she couldn't stand the thought of me living in this apartment. She was upset that they were living in the old house while I was here, saying it was unfair. "The rent for this place is being paid by James, isn't it? It wouldn't be strange for us, his family, to live here. That's what living beyond your means means." It seemed Jessica thought my son was paying the rent for the apartment. That explained why she was always showing up here. In her mind, the apartment should have been a place for her family to live. "All right, I will leave," I retorted, staring her down. I agreed to move my belongings out within 3 days. Jessica seemed skeptical, demanding I call a moving company in front of her. I immediately called a moving service from my smartphone and scheduled them to come in 2 days. As she left, satisfied, I watched her retreating figure and started formulating a plan. I moved out as promised. My new home was an apartment specifically for seniors. I decided to try it out for 2 weeks. I handed over the keys and lease documents to Jessica, asking for a change in the contract through the real estate agent to the landlord. As I've known the landlord for a long time, they were flexible and accommodating, which was a relief. My eldest son was furious with Jessica for kicking me out. He seems to be contemplating divorce, but Jessica doesn't seem to care. On the contrary, she appears to have started living alone in my apartment, declaring, "Well, then let's live separately." I can only marvel at how brazen she is. However, in 5 days, Jessica will come to know the truth. While I was working remotely, my phone began ringing repeatedly. The caller was Jessica. I had been anticipating this, so I had a recorder ready to record the conversation. I pressed the record button on the recorder and then answered the call. "Excuse me, Mother. What's the deal with the rent for this apartment? Why do I have to pay it? This isn't right." As soon as I picked up the phone, Jessica started ranting. I could tell that she was flustered. Oh, but Jessica, aren't you the current leaseholder? It's only right that you should pay. Is there a problem? I deliberately spoke in a calm and leisurely tone to irritate Jessica. The flustered Jessica seemed to become even more agitated. But didn't James used to pay the rent here? We're not even divorced yet, so shouldn't James pay it? When Jessica told my eldest son about the rent issue, he told her that I knew the truth and that she should call me. In reality, there was never a time when my eldest son paid the rent. In fact, I had been financially assisting him. After retiring from my job, I stayed on at the company as a consultant. In addition to that, I have been working as an advisor in the industry, providing advice when requested and earning a decent salary. With my proven track record, I earned far more than my eldest son. I had been secretly helping my son as he was struggling due to Jessica's extravagant spending habits. So, it's a misunderstanding on your part, Jessica. Originally, I was the one paying the rent for that place. I didn't make James pay a dime. Jessica, who had been hoping to enjoy living separately in the new apartment, seemed shocked and taken aback. Jessica only said what she wanted to say before hanging up the phone. I immediately contacted my eldest son and let him listen to the recorded conversation. I've been putting up with it for a while too, but I'm at my limit. You feel the same, right? I'm aware that my son is worn out from repaying the debts that Jessica has accumulated. No matter how grown up my son may be, as a parent, I can't help but lend a hand. Even if people say I'm too soft, I believe it's natural as a parent. My son replied in a small voice, I'll divorce her. I'm tired too. Well, follow my instructions then. I told my son my plan and gave him instructions. I first asked him to take paid leave for about 3 days from today. I directed him to discreetly move out his important belongings without letting Jessica know. We don't want her noticing any large trucks as she might be hanging around nearby. I had told him to gradually move things out during the night. The location where the important belongings were moved was somewhere Jessica was unaware of. It was a single-family home that I had searched for as a final dwelling. In this way, the plan progressed secretly. Then 3 days later, there was another call from Jessica. She was much more flustered than the other day. What? What are you so flustered about? Just like the other day, I dealt with her in a deliberately relaxed tone. Jessica was overly anxious, almost in a state of panic. Mother, our house is up for sale and I got a call from my parents saying that my belongings have arrived at their house. What does that mean? Apparently, my eldest son had moved according to my instructions. He had sent Jessica's belongings to her parents' house and put up the house she lived in for sale, leaving it empty. The landlord told me that if I can't pay the rent, I should leave. I thought I should consult with James, and when I got home, there were chains and a padlock on the gate, and I couldn't get in. There's even a for sale sign up. Jessica was almost hysterical. She must have been surprised when she got home. I have already formally entered into a sales contract with the realtor. We can't get into that house anymore. Jessica, there are a few things I want to correct. I started off like that. Now is the time to vent all my built-up stress. Firstly, I'm no longer your mother-in-law, right? Yesterday, James should have filed for divorce. You signed it, didn't you? You and I are strangers now. Yesterday, my eldest son had submitted the divorce papers to the city office. It seems that the divorce papers were signed by Jessica a long time ago. Threatening to divorce if he didn't do as she said was apparently a habit of hers. My eldest son thought that one day Jessica would rehabilitate. She was the person he had loved enough to marry. When threatened with divorce, he had no choice but to give in, as he once told me. But it seems my eldest son has woken up. He signed his name on the divorce papers that were always used as a threat and submitted them. The divorce papers have been formally accepted. You always said to James that you could divorce any time. Aren't you satisfied now that things have gone your way, Jessica? On the other side of the phone, I sensed Jessica holding her breath. She wanted to retort but couldn't find the words. She must be feeling frustrated. Besides, I'm worried about you. After divorce, you can't continue to live in that apartment without working, can you? And moving costs money too. It's tough. How did you even manage to pay this amount? I can't believe it. Jessica didn't hide her anger anymore. She yelled at me and continued to curse me. She said she married my son because my late husband left an inheritance. However, I manage all of the inheritance and she cannot move a penny of it. She screamed that nothing was going well despite marrying for the sake of repaying debts. Of course, I let my son listen to this conversation as well. If it came to a divorce settlement, the recording is what I was planning to submit as evidence. I thought it was the end, so I patiently waited for Jessica to finish her tantrum. I think she ranted for about 15 minutes with ease. "I'm sorry, I've been disowned by my family. I have nowhere to return. Please help me." In the end, she started begging me for help, crying. She had caused her parents much trouble due to her spending and borrowing habits, and they disowned her, she said. Come to think of it, I remember feeling something off at the wedding. It clicked for me. That was what felt odd. Jessica with nowhere to go, nowhere to return. I felt a bit sorry for her, but I decided to view it as a consequence of her actions. Apologizing now won't do much. We're strangers now. There's nothing more to discuss. Good luck with your life from here on. I ended the call with Jessica after saying that. I felt a sense of relief. After our call, Jessica apparently caused a ruckus at my eldest son's workplace. My son told me the situation escalated to the point of calling the police when he got home from work. Jessica, who had been squatting at the apartment without paying rent, had her keys changed by the landlord while she was out. Apparently, she can't even get into her apartment now. She probably tried to reach out to me or my son, but we had canceled our cell phones and switched to new ones. We changed our numbers, too. I can only imagine the despair she felt upon finding she can't get through, no matter how many times she tries. We didn't tell her our new address either, so she can't contact us. After causing a scene at my son's company, she was issued a restraining order. With no other options, she seemed to have turned to her disowned family. When she returned home, she was met with a shocking scene. The luggage I had sent to her family home was left out in the rain in the backyard. She reportedly wasn't even allowed to step foot inside the house. The rent she had not paid for the apartment had been billed to her parents, probably adding fuel to their anger. I heard rumors that she is currently staying in an apartment rented by an organization that supports homeless people. Without the ability to spend as before, she seemed stressed. When I passed her on the street, I was stunned at how much her hair had turned white and how dry her skin looked. She had changed so much, I hardly recognized her at first. It made me realize just how much a change in living conditions can affect a person. I started a new life in the house I purchased with my late husband's inheritance. I bought a duplex so my son could remarry anytime he wanted. For now, my son joins me for dinner, but otherwise he takes care of his own things. I've come to think that this is just the right amount of distance. The money from the sale of my parents' home is saved for future needs. I plan to use it for my son and his future wife when they marry. Of course, I also need to keep some for any future grandchildren. I'm thinking of setting up the English garden I've always wanted in my new home. On days when I don't work, I go out into the garden and take care of the young trees and herbs. This new life filled with hope has become my daily routine.
My name is Lisa. It's been just about a year since I married my husband, Robert. We've been living happily together in a small, cheap apartment, dreaming of moving into a newly built, detached house. His parents' house is located within a 5-minute walk, but they seldom come to our place. He once said, "My mom doesn't want to be the type to meddle with her son's marriage. That's why she doesn't visit us, even though we live so close." Upon hearing this, I started liking my mother-in-law even more. The biggest concern for most women after getting married is the meddling mother-in-law, but it seems I don't have to worry about that. If I were to be meddled with, I am sure I would resist. I've always been told by my parents, "If somebody picks on you, give it back twice as hard. Then nobody will mess with you." But it seemed unlikely I'd have to fight with my mother-in-law, so I was able to live stress-free regarding my family relationships. After several years of working, our careers were going well, and we started to have many conversations about buying a house. During this time, my parents, who had heard about our discussions, made us an attractive proposal. "We've always thought if you two decided to build a house, we'd give you some of our land. Feel free to use it." They offered to give us part of their own land. My parents aren't rich though. Thanks to a windfall my grandfather got a while ago, they have had some very good land to pass on to us. When they discussed it with my grandfather, he said, "I've passed it on to you, so do as you please." When I told Robert about this, he said, Let's take advantage of their generosity. I'll never be able to thank your parents enough. And thank your grandpa too. It's his land after all. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. So, we began to discuss what kind of house we wanted to live in, visiting showrooms on the weekends, touring our boss's impressive mansion, and talking to agents about new residences being built. Planning is often more fun than actually executing, isn't it? But then one day, a call from my mother-in-law shattered our happy life suddenly. When Robert answered a call from his mother, it seemed she had somehow heard about our plans to build a new house. She said to Robert, "If you're going to build a house, how about making it a duplex so we can live together?" We were both stunned by her proposal. We hadn't imagined that my mother-in-law, who had seldom interfered in our lives, would want to live with us in a duplex. After a few seconds of silence, Robert made a non-committal response and continued to dodge this question. It's not surprising that he reacted this way. We hadn't considered the option of a duplex. We were planning to have a room for a future child, but if we were to make it a duplex, we'd have to replan everything from scratch. But I worried that if we outright rejected the idea, our relationship with my mother-in-law would suffer. I was as perplexed as Robert. We had made a promise to have dinner at her place once a month, so we had a family dinner there. My mother-in-law began to continue her conversation from where we cut off last time, even though there was Robert's brother, Mark, a single father. "Hey, have you given any thought to our conversation from the other day about the duplex? I think it's a really good idea, though. What do you think? Of course we will contribute financially, and selling our place here should net a pretty penny. Besides, kids are going to come along eventually, right? Wouldn't it be helpful if we're right next door whenever there's trouble? Isn't it all upsides?" And with that, she started rapid-fire listing off the merits of a duplex. I tried to interject several times, but she didn't let me. Sure, she had a point. It would be nice to have help when a baby comes along, and the financial contribution is appealing. But I believed that my husband and I could handle any issues that were within her capacity to solve. Besides, it's better to rely on my own parents than to increase the chances of being bullied by her. Seeing my contemplative face, she continued, "Is it really that bad? Living with us, I mean. I thought you didn't hate us, but maybe I was wrong." She seemed to be playing the part of the saddened, so I pretended not to hear and hurriedly left her house. She continued to bombard my husband daily with the same spiel, and I was starting to feel quite stressed. "What do you want to do, Robert?" "Living together isn't bad, I guess. It would be reassuring to have our parents around, but I don't want to lose our alone time either." After much thought, we decided to decline my mother-in-law's offer. We wanted to give a priority to our own time. We decided to prioritize that. Surely if we explain properly, my mother-in-law will understand. So the day of our monthly family dinner arrived, and we were heading over to my mother-in-law's house to relay our decision. As we tried to express our thoughts to her, she interrupted. "Oh, about the duplex. We've been moving forward with the plan." "Huh? What?" Before we could react further, she added, "Oh, and Mark's moving in too. You know he's a single dad. It's tough, right? Let's help him out with the kid. Plus, getting some experience with kids will be reassuring when you have your own, don't you think? You should definitely do that." We were so shocked by her words that we completely forgot why we had come. Seeing our silence, my mother-in-law took it as approval and proceeded with the construction of the duplex, taking into account the views of my father-in-law and brother-in-law. Of course, we didn't just stand by. We tried to convey our decision to our in-laws several times, but they always dismissed us, saying, "We're busy right now, let's talk later." And the plans for the duplex moved forward. The cost for the construction was being covered by our in-laws, so we didn't have a huge financial burden. But not only would we be living with our in-laws, but also my single father brother-in-law, and we would have to help take care of his child. Thinking about it, I was already feeling down. My husband was of no help, having thrown in the towel, saying, "There's nothing we can do to stop it now. Let's just give up." I also felt it was futile to resist alone. We then finalized the blueprint and started deciding on interior elements like the tiles and flooring. Normally at this stage, we should have secured the funds. However, the money my in-laws had promised to pay for the multi-family house was nowhere to be seen. My husband Robert called his mother asking her to transfer the funds, but she responded, "Something came up and I need money immediately. Could you cover it for me? I promise to pay you back in a month, okay?" Even though they can't pay now, the project has already proceeded and it's impossible to cancel everything at this point. Robert and I could barely manage to cover it ourselves, but we didn't feel the need to go to such lengths. My in-laws' selfish behavior infuriated both of us. "Hey, you talk about covering the cost like it's a small change," Robert yelled at his mother. "Come on, she said she'd pay it back in a month. Has she ever lied to you?" Suddenly, my brother-in-law butted in. Stunned by his intervention, Robert agreed to wait for a month for the payment and started waiting for his mother's transfer. I decided to consult with my parents about this. The next day, I went to my parents' house and explained the situation, wondering if we could put the plans on hold. They said, "We were going to give you that land anyway, and if they're promising to pay later, we'll cover the cost." "Really? Are you sure?" "Of course, dear. Your happiness is all that matters to us. Don't give up on your dream house. For the sake of your future children, don't let this multifamily plan go through. Thank you." I was so grateful that I teared up. My mom smirked and said, "Plus, if they're around all the time, it'll be hard for me to visit, right? And I want to hog all the grandkids to myself." With my mother's help, the construction proceeded as planned, and finally, our dream home was completed. However, a month later, we still hadn't received any money from my mother-in-law. Meanwhile, they had started moving their belongings in before us. "Strange, isn't it a bit cramped for a duplex? Where's my room?" Since they didn't transfer the money for a duplex, we didn't build one. Naturally, there was no room for her. But she started moving her stuff into the room we'd planned for our future children. To make matters worse, she invited her friends over under the guise of a housewarming party and showed them around the house. "It's our dream duplex. It's a bit small, but we have a wonderful garden and can even plant a vegetable garden. Once the veggies are ready, I'll share some with you," she said, as if they had built the house with their own money. Her friends, unaware of the circumstances, complimented the house before leaving. After they moved in and things settled down, 2 months passed and we still hadn't received any payment from my in-laws. Robert confronted them, but they kept saying, "Soon, very soon." The situation didn't change even after 3 months or even half a year. On the contrary, my mother-in-law announced one day, "We decided not to sell our house. Instead, we'll have Mark and his kids live there," blatantly stating that she wouldn't pay us any money. But I wasn't surprised. My husband and I had often discussed that she likely had no intention of paying. "Oh, I just noticed that the house is a bit cramped when you two live there too. Can you guys move out? I have friends who occasionally want to stay over, and I want to be able to use the place freely. Doesn't that sound good?" she asked. In response, my husband raised his voice slightly and said, "That's not the deal. Why should we have to leave our own house?" "Well, both of you are working, right? You're hardly ever at home. And since you don't have any kids, it shouldn't be a problem. Besides, Lisa's family is rich, right? You can afford to build a new house." I was dumbfounded by my mother-in-law's outrageous words. My husband felt the same way. "First off, you haven't paid any of the expenses like you said you would. If you're not selling the house, you had no intention of paying from the beginning, right?" "What can I do? I decided to let Mark, who's a single father, live there. What's wrong with giving a house to my own son and his adorable children?" She started to get increasingly irritated, and it seemed unlikely that things would clear up. So we decided to discuss it in our bedroom that night. "If things continue like this, my mother and her family will definitely try to kick us out and take over the house." Yeah, I suppose so. My husband was right. From the next day onwards, my mother-in-law's attacks continued daily, and she started making nasty comments and harassing me. "If you don't want to be bullied as a daughter-in-law, you better move out quickly." This is what they call mother-in-law versus daughter-in-law problems. I thought I wouldn't have to deal with such issues, but experiencing them firsthand turned out to be more troublesome than I'd imagined. When we were living in that small room, we barely interacted with her. Maybe I was foolish to not anticipate that things would turn out this way. However, being a person who believes in giving back as good as she gets, I decided to put a plan into action a month later. My husband, parents, grandfather, and I put a plan together. We decided to leave the house to execute our plan. My husband told my mother-in-law, "We're moving out. You want to invite your friends over as you please, right? You'll be happier that way." The moment she heard that, her face lit up with joy. We decided to move to a newly built apartment that we'd had our eyes on and return to renting. Reminds me of our newlywed days.
Yeah, it does.
Recalling our life in that apartment when we were newly married, we lived peacefully. Then, a week later, the phone rang. I overheard my husband say,
"I see, that's great. By when?"
I was sure that our plan had worked. In fact, the day after we made the plan with my parents and grandfather, we put our house up for sale. We found a buyer who wanted us to vacate in 3 weeks. While my mother-in-law wasn't around, we let acquaintances, colleagues, and others who wanted to see the house inside. Today's phone call was about one family who decided to buy. Then we arranged for 2 large trucks and decided to have the movers quickly load our belongings and furnitures onto them. We carefully timed it for when my in-laws announced that they were going to a theme park in New York over the weekend with their grandsons. They are probably enjoying their time with a certain mouse mascot right about now. Since they said they would be staying overnight, we thought that was our chance and prepared in advance. Everything went smoothly as planned because the professional movers did the packing for us, and it was completed much faster than we anticipated. We waited in front of the house, and when my in-laws returned in the evening, they seemed tense that something was different. My mother-in-law, looking anxious, entered the house and screamed, "What is this? What happened? Where are all our things?" My father-in-law was also making a fuss. Robert and I calmly observed my in-laws from the outside, and when they came out, we revealed the truth. Robert said, "Everything is loaded on these trucks. The destination is noted on a piece of paper stuck onto the trucks, so please go there. It might be a bit small, but it's enough for the 2 of you to live in. Well, it might get a bit cramped if you invite friends over. Also, this house has already been sold. It's someone else's property now. Take care." My in-laws were flabbergasted. "What do you mean you put it up for sale? It was our house. You can't just..."
"Our house? The property was in Lisa's parents' name, and the house is in our name. We are the owners, so we have the right to sell it. And you dare say it's your house when you haven't paid $1. You should be ashamed."
At the unexpected words from their son, my in-laws, who were causing a big fuss, fell silent. Before we left, Robert said, "We've taken care of things until now, but you'll have to unload things yourselves. You can afford that much, can't you?" "We don't have that kind of money."
"I know you must have. You've been selling things you stole from Lisa and depositing the money in your bank account."
"How did you know that?" "Does it matter? Oh, and you don't have to pay us back. Consider it severance pay. Use it however you like."
And with that, we'll be off. I doubt we'll meet again.
With that, Robert made a declaration of severance to his parents, took my hand, and we hurried home. We then called our parents and grandparents to inform them of the successful execution of our plan, and they were very happy. Moreover, my grandfather, knowing that we were about to continue living in an apartment, said,
"Actually, I still have some land left. I'll give it to you two. I'll also cover half the costs, so build a new house."
And that's exactly what we did. Half a year later, we completed our dream of building a brand new single-family home. We're a bit removed from the city center, but the air is fresh, the neighbors are kind, and we're very happy. As for the whereabouts of my in-laws, we don't know if they went to the address we provided. It seems they contacted my parents asking for financial aid. They also apparently asked their son, who is planning to remarry next year, if they could live with him, but he flatly refused because his new wife was also planning to move in. My parents decisively turned them down. They told them not to involve our family anymore. Robert apologized to my parents for his terrible ones, but my parents said, "From now on, we're your real parents. Feel free to rely on us as much as you want as a son." Thinking about potential future incidents, my parents recommended that we install a home security system. We can rest easy knowing they've been briefed to turn away his parents if they ever show up. Moreover, we have a guard dog that is a small, cute puppy in our yard. I highly doubt they'd have the guts to intrude. From now on, we won't have to deal with his parents at all. It's the beginning of a new life for the two of us. We'll surely have children in a few years and build a happy family. We won't let anyone disturb our happiness. That's a promise we've made to ourselves.
My name is Emma. Ever since I dropped out of high school, I've poured everything into my work. I decided to leave high school because there was something I just had to do. Although my parents were worried, they supported my decision. I believe that I am where I am today because of their support. Recently, my parents, to whom I am deeply grateful, told me that they are considering letting go of our family home. This home is a single-family house that was handed down from my grandparents. It has been renovated over the years, but as it has been used for many years, it has started to show signs of wear and tear. With my parents getting older, they are considering moving to a barrier-free apartment and demolishing the family home. Indeed, I realized that our old home was indeed old, and so I proposed to my parents that we live together. I may get married eventually, so we might not be able to live together for long. However, I wanted to give back to my parents who had supported me without denying the decisions I made when I was young. So my parents and I moved into a new apartment. We now have more rooms than we did in our old house, and since we live on a high floor, my parents are delighted, saying, "The view is great, and we even have a hobby room." Then one day, while I was living peacefully with my parents, I got a call from my younger sister, Jane. Jane and I have not been on good terms for a long time. That's because she feels ashamed of me. When I decided to drop out of high school, Jane was furious. "Why are you quitting high school, Emma? I don't want any of my friends to find out that my sister dropped out of high school because it's embarrassing. From now on, pretend we don't know each other." Although Jane and I went to different high schools, it seems that me dropping out of high school was something to be ashamed of for Jane. Jane is a very hard worker and attended a higher ranked high school than I did, so she has always looked down on me. Jane, whose favorite phrase is, "Emma is stupid," made fun of me at the time, saying, "There's no way you're going to succeed in what you want to do. You can't even understand that, Emma, because you're stupid." I was tired of hearing Jane tell me almost every day that you're causing trouble for our parents by dropping out of high school, so you should leave. So as soon as I started earning money from part-time jobs after dropping out of high school, I left home. After 10 years have passed since then, and Jane had also left home. There was no communication between Jane and me, and since Jane started living alone in college, it seems she has not been in touch with our parents much either. When our parents decided to demolish our family home, they apparently consulted not only me, but also Jane. However, Jane just said, "I don't care about that old house. Do whatever you want." My parents were racking their brains, wondering, why did Jane turn out like that? So when they got a call from Jane, they were surprised. According to Mother, who answered the phone, it seems that Jane got married without telling our parents anything. "So you've decided to live in a condo, right? We'll come visit with your husband sometime. Show us around." With these words, it was revealed that Jane was married. My parents, who had no clue, seemed quite surprised, but Jane herself casually shrugged it off, saying, "Didn't I mention it?" It was also revealed that Jane wasn't planning on having a wedding ceremony, which felt quite off. Jane was a girly girl who, since her childhood, had always dreamt of being a princess. She had even talked in detail about the kind of dress she wanted to wear at her wedding. It was quite strange that someone like her would get married without having a wedding ceremony. I wondered if her husband didn't have much money, but according to Jane, her husband worked at the same company as her. The company where Jane works is a well-known corporation, recognized by everyone nationwide. If he was working at such a company, he should have enough money, which made it even more mysterious. Finally, the day came when Jane visited her parents' house. Wow, such a large and clean room! The view was amazing. Excuse our intrusion. Jane's husband, left standing, greeted as Jane, without any hesitation, began to explore each room, even though it was her childhood home. Jane's husband is named Scott. He is a fresh-faced man with an expensive-looking watch on his wrist. What was strange was that, despite his very proper appearance, he didn't meet our eyes at all. After introducing himself to the parents, Scott was exploring the rooms without any restraint, just like Jane. Your parents are amazing. The station is close, and there's a shopping mall just around the corner. You moved to a great place. Yeah, all thanks to Emma. When my mother smiled at me, I humbly replied, "It wasn't a big deal." To which Jane made a deliberately mean face, saying, "Really? You have an older sister? I didn't notice. I never thought that such a beautiful and expensive-looking room would have an older sister living here." Huh? Jane, Emma is not freeloading. My father was about to explain, but Jane ignored him. Pointing at me, she beckoned Scott over. Hey, Scott. Do you believe this ugly woman is my sister? This is Jane's sister you've been talking about? I didn't realize because you two look nothing alike. Suddenly mocked by Jane and Scott, I stood dumbfounded. My mother scolded, "Jane, what are you saying?" But Jane didn't seem to care. My sister couldn't even graduate high school. She's not the brightest. There's a big difference between us, you know. We who have graduated from a state university. I was shocked when I heard that Jane's sister couldn't even properly graduate high school, but it seems like it's true. If she had someone like this in her family, it's no wonder Jane would be embarrassed. Laughing together, Jane and Scott opened the door to my room as they continued their conversation. And then, ugh! She exclaimed in disgust. What's the point of hoarding so much comic books? It's creepy. Are you still into that nerdy stuff? My room's walls are covered with comic books, because I'm a comic book artist. The reason I dropped out of high school was because I wanted to dedicate myself entirely to comic books. Jane is the type that feels disgust towards such subcultures, what we'd call extroverted. Just like how Jane can't understand why I, being introverted and passionate about comics, I can't understand why Jane applies her mascara so heavily. Well, I'm a comic book artist. These are all my references. You're probably not even a successful comic book artist, are you? You're still mooching off mom and dad. It's disgraceful. Just get out already. Confused by what she was saying, I instinctively replied, What? So just get out! Scott and I are going to be living in this house from now on. What? Jane, I've heard nothing of this. Mother and father both exclaimed in surprise. Ignoring their shock, Jane laughed snidely. Scott and I will take care of mom and dad. You're no longer needed, so get out. Aren't you embarrassed to still be mooching off them? Not only are you ugly, but you're also stupid. At Jane's words, Scott just chuckles. Holding back an angry mother, I said, All right. Jane and Scott's attitude had not only upset my parents, I was furious too. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I decided to give in to Jane's demand. All right, I'll move out in a few days, and you and Scott can live here. But remember, I'm not giving you any money. Sure. Bye, sis. Please, move out as soon as you can. After having their say, Jane and Scott headed home. The next time we come, it'll be to move in. They triumphantly told my parents before leaving. My parents told me, There's no need for you to move out. But I, who had sworn revenge on Jane and Scott, responded, No, I'm moving out. I have a place to go. I moved out promptly. Jane and Scott soon moved into our family home. On the day of the move, Have you moved out yet? Jane asked over the phone. I replied in exasperation. I'm on my way out now, so don't worry. Jane always behaves politely to our parents, never being mean to them. However, she often seemed to belittle me. To our parents, both Jane and I were their beloved daughters. They told Jane and Scott that it hurts to hear them badmouth me, but it seems the two didn't take it to heart. Then, a month later, just as I predicted, I got a call from Jane. As I picked up the phone, I thought, here it comes. And a nearly crying Jane blurted out, Emma! The property management company of the apartment called me, saying they haven't received the rent. What's going on? They even said if I continue to be in arrears, they'll kick me out. Why would I pay the rent? I don't live there anymore, do I? I've heard from Mother and Father. You were paying the rent because you wanted to show your gratitude to them, right? Why did you stop? Like I said, I don't live there, so I don't have an obligation to pay the rent. Just bring the money right now. The utility bills are also ridiculously high. Being disgusted with Jane, who kept talking and hung up, I called my boyfriend. Liam, Jane just asked me to come over. I'm going to our parents' house. Okay, I'll come with you. I'm worried about you, Emma, and I haven't seen your parents in a while. The reason why I immediately had a place to go after leaving my parents' home is because my boyfriend, Liam, offered me a room. As we were considering marriage, this past month was a good practice period for us. I went to my parents' house with Liam. As I opened the door of the house, Jane, red with anger, showed up. Did you bring the money? Pay the money properly for the sake of showing gratitude to our parents. Do you think I'm a struggling cartoonist, Jane? How do you think I can afford the rent for such a luxury apartment? Well, I don't know, but you were able to pay until now, right? Please pay the rent and utility bills. I won't. Jane and Scott, you both work for respectable companies, right? Why can't you pay your own rent? At my question, Jane was at a loss for words. I noticed that Jane might not have the money. Jane was dressed in branded clothing from head to toe, and I noticed a luxury-looking watch on Scott's arm, who was also decked out in branded items. Isn't it that Jane and Scott can't pay the rent? Not that they won't? You said you wanted to take care of Mother and Father, but I heard you've left all the housework to Mother. Aren't you and Scott just living off Mother and Father? Jane, who was struck at the heart, bit her lip. Scott, who was not looking at me, but only at Liam, raised his trembling voice. Why is Liam here? Huh? Liam? Scott seemed startled, while Jane appeared nonplussed. Liam, who had been watching the sisters quarrel with a troubled look, then introduced himself with a smile. Hello there. I see you already knew. I'm dating Emma with the intention of marrying her. What? Emma and Liam are dating? What the hell? Who is this Liam guy? Scott, seemingly agitated, addressed Jane, who seemed not to be following the conversation. Don't you know? He's a voice actor from an anime that caused a societal buzz. You've seen him on TV and all. What? Why is my sister dating such a guy? It's because Emma is the one who drew the original story for that socially influential anime. When Liam gently explained about me, Jane's face was a picture of shock. Actually, I had a series in a boys' magazine, and that comic had become so popular, it was considered a societal phenomenon. Even Jane, who was not well versed in comics, recognized the title and turned pale, seeming to regret all the times she had underestimated me now that she knew I was rich. I sighed at Jane's sudden change in attitude and told Jane and Scott, if you can't pay, then leave right now. I'll be demanding the 1 month's rent from you later. Don't say that, sis. Scott and I, we got hooked on gambling and ran out of money. It turned out that Jane and Scott had become deeply absorbed in slot machines and had lost a considerable amount of money. The reason they decided to live with their parents back home was also due to a lack of funds. It seemed they even borrowed money from shady sources, and most of their decent salary was going towards repaying that debt, which was quite shocking. I have no intention of helping Jane, who has always been mocking me. Our parents are moving again, so you and Scott should leave right away. Why are Mom and Dad moving? So you won't come crying to them. I can easily imagine debt-ridden Jane causing trouble for our parents. If you don't leave promptly, I will be charging you for the second month's rent as well. When I sternly made that clear, Jane and Scott reluctantly said, "Okay," and the gathering dispersed. My parents, who had been out, heard about this later and called Liam to apologize, but Liam seemed unfazed. "Perhaps it would be best to avoid seeing Jane for a while," he said, and helped me find a new place for my parents to move to. I promptly bought a new apartment, and my parents prepared to move, once again. "I'm sorry for the trouble," my parents said, and I replied, "It's only natural to repay the favor to you both, who supported me when I made the drastic decision to drop out of high school. I am what I am today because of you." My parents were brought to tears at this. Jane and Scott seemed to be struggling with debt repayments even after that, but I had no obligation to show mercy, so I demanded full payment for the 1 month's rent and utilities I had fronted. But Jane and Scott didn't pay back the money and stopped answering their phones, so I called their workplace directly and finally received the payment. However, this caused everyone at their company to find out about the debt-ridden couple, Jane and Scott. Apparently, they can't quit their jobs because they need the money, and they continued to work, feeling quite uncomfortable. Afterwards, I married Liam. Our parents gave us their blessings, and we've been leading a happy life. Although I've cut ties with Jane and Scott as blood-related siblings, I wish for them to live strong.
I'm going to make my wife work with only $50 for groceries every month. At our wedding, my husband proudly made this declaration, leaving me stunned. The joyous and blissful atmosphere of the wedding froze in an instant. I'm so lucky I've scored myself a cheap housemaid. As I realized that this was his intention, I felt like everything was going dark before my eyes. Then a stern voice echoed throughout the venue. "Is that all you wanted to say, you bastard?" As my father stood up and approached us, my husband condescendingly said, "Don't get cocky, old man." My husband, who was looking down on my father, had no idea about what was waiting for him. My name is Sarah. I met my husband, Jack, in college. We were in the same year. We lost contact after graduation, but when we were 24, he threw a reunion party. That night, I drank a little too much and felt sick. Jack looked after me and said to our classmates, "Don't force her to drink." He was really considerate of me. He had matured a lot since his wild college days and treated me really nicely and carefully, as if I were a precious gem or a princess. He confessed that he had actually liked me since we were in the same class, and that he threw the reunion because he wanted to see me again. We soon started dating, and after a few months, I moved into his apartment. When we were 25, he proposed and we got married. Turns out, Jack was the heir to a big corporation. He never boasted about it, but people often told me, "Wow, you've hit the jackpot." His parents, whom we met when we announced our marriage, seemed really nice, and I felt relieved. My parents were also happy about my marriage with Jack. My father, a small business owner who started his business when he was young and had his share of hardships, was probably relieved that I wouldn't have to struggle. From then on, it was fun planning our wedding together, booking the venue, picking out my wedding dress. One day, with our wedding just a few months away, Jack said something unexpected at dinner. "Sarah, your cooking is always delicious. I think you do great running the house as a full-time housewife." "Huh? But I was planning on working even after getting married." I was surprised. My plan was to continue working, and Jack had never once said that he wanted me to quit. "It's fine if you work part-time on the side while doing housework and looking after kids. I'm sure you'd want some pocket money too." "But I've been working hard at my job this whole time, and I want to continue working full-time." "I need to start training a successor for the company. Leave the money-making to me, and I'd like you to focus on being a homemaker," he said while cheerfully munching on his dinner, as if he was proud of himself for being the sole breadwinner. "We don't even have kids yet. Even if we do, I want to continue working. I can't put all the burden on you." "Huh? Why?" My persistence seemed to upset Jack, and he suddenly frowned at me. "I won't slack off on housework or raising kids, please." I found myself saying that because I desperately wanted to keep working. Jack responded to my words with a bright smile. Okay, if you insist, that's fine. They say women feel uneasy when they lose connection with society. So go ahead and do your best with housework and childcare. I was relieved that he readily agreed. However, his words, do your best with housework and childcare, didn't quite sit right with me. When I talked about this with my friends, they replied, Jack cares about you, Sarah. He's a good husband. That made me feel happy, making me feel I was being cherished and eased my concerns. After that, we sometimes discussed our future. Sarah, you're such a strong, independent woman who wants to continue working even after getting married. I'm glad to have a woman like you as my wife. His kind words always made me happy. I should also take part in some of the housework, too. All right, I'll handle the household accounts and hand you the living expenses, so we'll work with that expense every month. I always thought managing finances was a woman's job, so I was deeply moved when Jack offered to do it. Oh, I don't have to do everything by myself? That's a relief. And so came our wedding day. With many guests blessing us, the ceremony went smoothly, and I was overwhelmed with joy. Then, an incident broke out at the end of the ceremony. I'm going to make my wife work with only $50 for groceries every month. During his speech, Jack suddenly made this absurd statement. I was stunned, my mouth wide open in disbelief. The other guests started murmuring, and the festive mood instantly turned ice cold. Ah, I'm so lucky to have such a cheap maid, he said, grinning at me, oblivious to the fact that he just ruined our wedding. What on earth is he talking about? I was horrified to see him change so abruptly. I never agreed to such an absurd thing as $50 a month for groceries. You agreed when I said I'll manage the finances, didn't you? Huh? Well, yes. I couldn't believe that this was his plan all along. I blanked out. I suddenly realized that he might have been deceiving me all this time. I let my wife say she wants to do all the housework and childcare while working full-time. I'm sure she'll be able to handle all the chores perfectly and make nutritious, filling meals for just $50 a month. Hearing him spout such nonsense, I quickly covered his mic with my hand. Don't just say whatever you want. I won't accept this. What's wrong? Didn't I tell you to do your best with the housework and childcare? Aren't you supposed to help out too? I never said anything like that. We can't live together like this. Suddenly, Jack's expression changed, and with a terrifying look in his eyes, he whispered in my ear. We're bound by this ceremony. It's too late to cancel the marriage now, right? We've already turned in our marriage certificate. Do you really want to get divorced? You're threatening me. Quit messing with me. I never thought I would argue with Jack, to whom I had pledged my future on what should have been the best day of my life. Filled with regret and anger, I felt my face heat up, tears welling up in my eyes. This isn't what I signed up for. I can't believe I'm going to be misused like a servant by this man. I now deeply regretted marrying Jack. Just then, someone abruptly stood up from their seat and approached us. Is that all you wanted to say, you bastard? It was my father, Robert. His temples were throbbing, his gaze intense. I could tell he was infuriated on my behalf. How dare you treat someone's daughter like this in front of her parents? The tone in his voice froze the already tensed atmosphere in the venue. Our wedding guests held their breath, watching the stare-down between my father and Jack. What's your problem? Don't get so cocky. Looking down on my father, Jack had an evil expression that I had never seen before, which made me shiver. My father's the president of a major corporation, and I'm his successor. A small business owner of a company I've never even heard of shouldn't act all high and mighty. When I introduced my father to Jack, he praised my father, saying he was a great man, despite the fact that his company was small. And he even told me, I fell in love with you, and your family background won't change my feelings for you. In the end, he had just deceived me with sweet words. Just as Jack was about to confront my father again, a loud shattering sound of glass shocked the whole venue. We all turned to see what had happened. There stood Jack's father, his hands shaking uncontrollably and his face turning to an alarming shade of blue. In stark contrast to Jack's demeanor, His father had a look of sheer panic on his face. Idiot, stop it, Jack. Don't you dare cross that man. What are you scared of? We could crush this little company in an instant and toss it aside, right? In response to Jack's mockery, his father shouted out in a trembling voice, "That gentleman is one of our major shareholders." Huh? This old guy? Jack, with a baffled look on his face, alternated his gaze between his own father and mine. While my father's company was indeed small in scale, he had started it himself, and he received compensation such as executive remuneration and dividends from stocks. Moreover, he held stocks in companies other than his own, and if he sold them, he would have assets amounting to several $100 million. Among these stocks were those of the company owned by Jack's father. That's why my father, as a major shareholder, had the right to influence the company's management policies. When Jack learned this fact, he was stunned and blurted, "So did you tell me to date Sarah because you wanted to get your hands on her father's wealth?" "It's more than that." Jack's father was seeking for something greater out of this marriage, but just didn't tell Jack about it, since his son was a guy full of himself. Jack's father had his eyes on my father's patents. He's currently paying a significant amount of money to my father's company to use that patent, but if Jack and I were to marry, he would no longer have to pay for it, and he could use it freely. Patents? And you were told to date me? Jack, you never actually liked me? What kind of nonsense is that? I'm the son of a major corporation's CEO, you know. If it weren't for my dad's request, I would never be with you. What the hell? I truly loved you. Matter of fact, I was supposed to be set up with a beautiful heiress. Instead, I've been putting up with a mediocre girl like you all this time. You should be grateful. Enraged, Jack knocked a flower from the table, scattering white petals everywhere. Jack, please don't talk anymore. Jack's father was pale as a ghost, trembling like he was seconds away from fainting. But that's all understandable. His son wouldn't stop making remarks that would infuriate the last person he'd want to cross. Shut up. It's all your fault, Dad. Just as the father-son argument was about to break out, my father's voice echoed once again. That's enough. For a moment, the room fell silent. Sarah, what are you going to do? Do you still want to marry this kind of man? My father gently asked me, but I quietly shook my head. I can't be happy marrying this sort of man. A man who would treat me as a maid, trying to have me live on $50 for food every month. I just couldn't bear the thought of being with him. This is economic abuse, isn't it, Jack? I will sue you. I'm also going to annul our marriage, so be prepared for that. What? Are you okay with being a divorcee? Well, you're going to be a divorcee too, so we might as well share the pain. I won't hold back anymore. Since I realized he had no love for me, I had completely lost feelings for him. I'd rather be a divorcee than be exploited under such ridiculous conditions. When I firmly stated my decision, my father also nodded in agreement. That's probably for the best. As for your company, we will take appropriate measures. I wonder what will happen to your company from now on. When my father said this with a terrifying look on his face, it seemed Jack finally realized the gravity of the situation. He fell on his knees, begging for mercy with his father. Our foolish son has been terribly rude. We promise to educate him well to avoid any future incidents. Please, just don't cancel the marriage. Sarah, I was wrong. Please forgive me. I'll let you do as you like with housework, childcare, and work. I won't limit your food expenses anymore. You can even hire a maid and relax at home if you want. We can hear all about your grievances in court. Dad, let's go home. I apologized to all the guests and returned all their gift money. Then I canceled the wedding. Afterwards, thanks to the skilled lawyer hired by my father, we managed to sue Jack in court. The cause of our broken engagement was determined to be Jack's fault, and he was forced to bear the full cost of our wedding fees. Plus, I also received compensation. Moreover, because he failed poorly at securing a convenience marriage and humiliated his father by having him beg on his knees, he got abandoned by his parents as well. There's no way he will ever sit in the CEO chair again. Jack, out of desperation, caused a ruckus at work and got in trouble with the police. From what I've heard, he got fired in the end. He's become worthless, aimlessly living life with no solid job. Of course, there's no chance for him to ever get set up with a Harris anymore. As a result of deceiving me and getting abandoned, his life became miserable. As for me, I ended up being a divorcee, but my father introduced me to a sincere young employee working at his company. I'm currently dating him, and we're planning on getting married next year.